Even the most advanced of students are going to make these mistakes. It doesn't really matter what level you're in or what score range you're in. It's still possible for you to make these mistakes because they're not really conceptually bound and they're more specific to the SAT rather than a certain skill on the SAT, right? And the reason why that is because the SAT literally designs these questions with this idea that you're going to make careless mistakes, right? And this is what I mean by careless mistakes is the common interpretation of them, as in like not reading the problem correctly or doing something incorrect that you knew you could have gotten, right? It wasn't anything conceptual. It was just a mistake that was made. And I actually think that you should take these more seriously, but I also separate them from careless mistakes. I do think these mistakes are specifically related to how the SAT is designed, and it's something that you just need to be aware of. And as soon as you're aware of it, you're able to correct it, right? And these concepts have nothing to do with the real test concepts. They're just the way that the questions are formatted that can be hard for most students. And if you can learn these strategies that I'm going to teach you to combat these kind of problems and implement them, practice them, and make sure these never affect you, you're going to instantly see an improvement regardless of what skill that you lack or you make the careless mistakes in or you lack full mastery in. You're going to be improving on those kinds of problems. So hi, I'm Karthik, and these are the most common SAT mistakes and strategies to get them right. All right, let's get right into it. Reading the problem incorrectly. And this might seem so basic, right? And it's so easy to just say, just focus up, read the problem more correctly. So I see students read problems incorrectly so many times. Even the most advanced of students, I just see them misinterpret it. And as soon as we go over the problem to review it, they just notice like instantly there's like a problem in like their idea, right? They instantly notice like, oh, I made this mistake. I shouldn't have made this mistake. This is what I'm going to do next time, right? But that's not good enough, right? Just saying that you're going to be able to read it correctly next time isn't going to actually help you. You need to implement a certain strategy that's going to allow you to do that, right? So this includes just reading the problem wrong, right? But it also includes like fully reading the problem and not thinking that you've read it incorrectly but misinterpreting like the answer that it wanted you to solve or the answer choices, right? You just forgot to read a certain word, you misunderstood it, right? Or you didn't read the problem all the way through. You were going through a math problem and read about halfway with all the information and thought just from that you would be able to solve the problem, and the rest of it was just extraneous information. And that's often not the case for any SAT problem. They often include all the raw information up until the end. And while there are some like fat problems, as in there's like problems where you need to cut the fat, right? Cut the problem. So like raw details from the extraneous details. There are certain things that are going to be all the way at the end, and you can never stop reading the problem all the way, right? You can only cut the fat after you've read the problem. And the SAT makes the problems explicitly clear, as in if you read it correctly and read it all the way through, you'll know every single detail that you will need to know, but they make it difficult to read, so they want you to make those mistakes. All right, here's how you're going to combat it with a word by word reading strategy, right? And like, I'm going to make a disclaimer, like, on rare occasions, I do make this mistake, right? It's almost impossible to expect 100% perfection out of yourself all the time, right? But I severely reduced the amount of times that I made this mistake from when I started SAT prep and I started taking it seriously to when I took my last SAT and I got an extremely high score, and to now where I'm actually teaching it. And I do make this mistake, but it's extremely rare that it happens. And the reason is I read problems word for word, right? And like in this format, I can read them aloud, and it makes it almost impossible for me to mistake something because I can catch myself when I'm reading it, right? But how you can do this in a testing environment is you can mouth the words to yourself, right? And if you're thinking that other people are going to be looking at you mouthing the words on the SAT and making judgments, don't even worry about that. Everyone is focused on themselves. Everyone is focused on their test. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of your weird strategy. If it works for you and if it gets you a good score, why should you care at all, right? By mouthing the words and not making any noise, you're going to be able to catch yourself making these mistakes. And on top of that, I use my pencil and I go over every single word. And you can use your finger as well if you don't want to carry your pencil, but just go under every single word as you read it. And that'll guarantee that you won't mess it up, right? And you can use this strategy, especially if you find yourself making mistakes on certain problems and you find yourself not able to understand the problem on the first go. Then do this strategy again as a way to just clarify your reasoning, right? This helped me focus on every single word, and I made sure to get into the habit of doing this, right? And basically reading the whole problem with this strategy became easier and became, like, I guess, it allowed me to be able to understand them better. But on top of that, you need to focus on reading the whole problem. And there's no strategy that I recommend for this. It's just something that you have to ingrain and do, right? Ingrain this idea that you're going to be doing that and you're not going to cut yourself short of that. And that being said, you need to test all these strategies out. Figure out if they work for you, make sure they work for you, practice them. And if they don't, try to find different ones. Try to create your own that might work and test them out. Okay. Second mistake, not solving for the answer. And this seems like extremely stupid and something that might be extremely easy to just solve, just solve for the answer. But that's the beauty of it, right? All of these mistakes seem like they can be so easily like destroyed and tackled, but we still make them. Even the most advanced of students make them. So that's why this is important. This is more specific to math or honestly anything conceptual like grammar or like an evidence question or a main idea question. But the issue here is that people often solve for the missing value or what is not presented instead of what the problem is asking for. And what I mean is a problem will have a missing variable, right? They'll have X and Y, but the problem is asking for what is X plus Y, right? So people will individually solve for X plus Y. Maybe they'll get the right answer, but it'll take them a long time. And then they'll add them together at the end and get their answer. Or they might make the mistake of like accidentally solving for one and thinking that's what they needed to solve for, right? And this wastes time, right? When you don't look at every time the SAT gives you a solution, right? They want you to solve it for X plus Y instead of what X and Y is individually. They do that on purpose because there's almost always a shortcut to get to that combined answer that doesn't involve a rigorous like deconstruction of the variables and solving for the individual variables, right? People solve for those things and they think that they're necessary when in reality they're a time waster. And it's a common pitfall of the SAT. If you're struggling with time, this is something you really need to focus on, right? This problem, obviously the accuracy point is probably the biggest here, is that people will not solve for the answer and solve for something else and then make that as their answer choice because it will be available as an answer choice. That's another trick that the SAT likes to do. But on top of that, it just wastes time and makes solving easy problems so much more difficult than it has to be. Okay, so what are you going to do? You're going to make a point to solve for what is asked, right? And this strategy that you choose to do this, it can vary a lot from person to person. I'm just going to explain mine, but this one is something especially that might not work for you, right? So I simply read out what I'm asked to solve, and every time I'm thinking of the problem, I'm thinking in the frame of that question. I always frame my mind around, it's not asking me for X, it's not asking me for Y, it's asking me for X plus Y. So how can I turn this system of equations to give me X plus Y? And then how can I just shortcut the answer like that? I always think like that, right? But for some people, that won't just come to you, right? You'll have to train yourself to be able to do that. So you can start off with underlining what they specifically want you to do it, rewriting what they specifically want you to solve on the paper. As you're solving it, just keep thinking what they specifically want you to do, write it down. And you can slowly train yourself to do this, like frame your mind around that thing and not even have to write it down or underline it, but think about the problem with that frame of mind. Just me telling you this is almost instantly going to improve your ability to think this way with those kind of problems, right? Try both of those strategies and see if they work for you. And if they don't, you might just have to come up with something on your own, and that might actually be easier for you, right? It might actually not be hard to come up with something on your own because it's so personal, and the way you encounter this problem and solve for it is very personal to you based on how you read problems, how you answer problems, and what your strong suits are, right? We remember this idea that we aren't really solving for values, but we're solving for the problem that the question is actually giving us, right? Not the problem that we want to solve, but what is given. And on top of that, remember during review, see if you can find faster ways to solve the problem, right? See if you can, like, you get a problem right, and then see if you can find a faster way to do that problem after, even if you got it right, if it includes one of these, like, what is X plus Y or what is 6X plus 3Y, right? Like any of those variable ones where they're not asking you for the missing value, but a combination of them. Because there's almost always a faster way to solve it that's not the raw variable. All right. So here's one more mistake, focusing on points/main ideas incorrectly, right? So for main ideas specifically, people are going to look at the answer choices and allow the answer choices to like warp their perception of the passage, because essentially in reading, you have to be able to memorize the passage, right? And if you're not able to do that, you're not going to be able to determine the perception of the main idea properly. So you read the answer choices and it actually influences your perspective, right? Because you don't have the passage raw in your head and you're just relying on the answer choices to give you the correct idea. And that's going to incorrectly influence what you pick. You're going to pick the one that you believe in, not the one that's actually explicitly stated. And similarly, this is true for evidence points, right? For main idea, you look at evidence of the passage and find what the main idea is. For the evidence points question, where it wants you to just find evidence for a certain idea, right? People are going to read the answer choices, and because those answer choices seem like they would be correct, as in the author would potentially agree with that answer, they pick them without realizing that it's not explicitly supported by the passage. It's not explicitly stated that that's true. Okay, so how do we combat this? Okay, so there's two parts to this solution, and there's something that you can do for both. So for main idea, I pretty much said it when I was like telling you the problem, is that you need to focus on explicitly the passage and then look at the answer choices, right? Paragraph and main idea, right? Versus like passage main ideas, right? You need to look at, for paragraphs, specifically what the like points of every single sentence is, and then find a main idea from that. If you're doing from the passage, take every paragraph, still do the sentence thing, find the main idea, but you just have to do that for every paragraph. And with all of those new main ideas, that becomes your new evidence point for the main idea of the entire passage, right? And again, don't read the answer choices before you already have a main idea in your head. That's the most important part of this. Now, for evidence, specifically find the points of the passage and compare it to the choices, right? Make sure it's not something that's going to be assumed, right? Even if the author would potentially agree with a statement. And I was doing an example earlier today where I was looking at a passage, right? And the author would definitely agree with a statement, but they never explicitly mentioned it in the passage. And therefore, that made it wrong, even though it seems so strongly correct. So you have to make sure that it's explicitly mentioned. So how do you do that? You have to go back to the passage. You can't read the answer choices first. It's going to influence your thinking, right? And for both of them, remember that the correct answer is always going to have direct evidence. SAT reading is not going to make you do radical inferences where something isn't explicitly stated or heavily, heavily implied with all the specific details, right? It doesn't, like, if I describe a shop as having a bunch of people in it and a bunch of people doing different things, it's safe to assume that the shop is busy, right? But the SAT will never have, the SAT will have you like infer that the shop is busy, but it's a very clear inference. The shop will not make you infer that the shop is making a lot of money, even though you could say that. Just the fact that it's busy doesn't mean that it's necessarily making a lot of money. So that's the difference between a clear inference and like a more abstract inference, right? There's always going to be an explicit reason. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you learned something today.